Welcome to This Constitution. My name is Savannah Eccles Johnston.
And I'm Matthew Brogdon.
Today we're going to talk about executive confirmations, which is a really in the news item right now. So the first big question we have to ask is why? Why is the Senate required to participate in the confirmation process for executive officers?
Yeah, it's not obvious, actually. I mean, we take it for granted because we've always had what we would call a Republican executive. An elected executive has to ask part of the legislature's permission in order to put his principal deputies in place. These people like cabinet officers, secretaries of state, and secretary of the treasury, and the attorney general, and all that sort of thing, and about 1,100 other people. But it's not obvious. I mean, the framers of the Constitution debated this, whether this should be the case. The King of England did not have to ask for confirmation either for executive officers or for judges. The power to appoint to office was totally a royal prerogative, right? Because these were people who were just carrying out the king's policies and so forth. And you could argue that the same thing is true now. The president is appointing these people to assist him in the execution of the laws. Why not just let the president pick the people he wants to do the job? And the feeling has been pretty much universally in states as well, that you need some kind of backstop to make sure the executive's not just handing out these offices as sort of favors or, to feather their own nest for when they leave office or do all sorts of other things with them. So the legislature's been, in American constitutionalism at least, an essential part of the executive's whole filling of offices, staffing up the executive branch.
Right. So this quality control matters here in this process, is we're making sure that people who hold these positions of immense public trust are verified, decent, capable, competent people.
I like the quality control bit because sometimes we tend to think of it, if you just said control, that wouldn't be quite right. It's sort of ensuring quality up front. Because just because the Senate consents to somebody, they're doing that on the basis of what they think they're going to do and on the basis of what they've done in the past. But once it's done, it's not as though this confirming authority in the Senate doesn't get to come back and sort of review the officer periodically and go, well, it's been 6 months now. How's it going? Are we going to keep you or not? Too bad. Once you've hired them, failing some pretty extraordinary measures, that's a done deal.
Well, actually, this is a point we should get to. The president needs advice and consent for hiring, but not for firing. And that seems to be although the Constitution says nothing about that, that's kind of the historical precedent, right? Jackson can fire his Secretary of the Treasury. And really, what can the Senate do about that?
Yeah, the Constitution only has one thing to say about removing people from office, and that is the impeachment power.
Right.
Congress can impeach anybody in the government, judicial, executive, and so on, and they can kick out their own members. So there is a means of firing people. Congress is involved in it, but it's really a nuclear option.
Right.
So there's got to be some method short of impeachment to remove people. Although there was one crazy person in the House of Representatives in the first Congress, whenever they were sort of debating this, really going like, we're going to create these new offices. We're creating a treasury with the Treasury Secretary. We know how you appoint them. How do you remove them? And there was one guy, Smith, I think it was Smith from South Carolina. And he said, well, the Constitution only provides impeachment as a means of removal. So once we appoint somebody to office, they're in office until they're impeached.
Oh, my gosh.
Which was a wild idea. I mean, can you imagine? It would basically mean all appointed offices were like
life tenure,
like judges, right? Tenured or in good behavior. You stay in office until you're removed through impeachment. And it was such it would have made the whole executive branch kind of like, kind of like a British bureaucracy, it's sort of people sitting there for life. If anybody ever said yes, minister, it'd be like the permanent bureaucracy.
Well, the president would matter a whole lot less.
Oh, yeah.
So we get back to this idea that we're doing quality control because this person is going to hold a big position of public trust, and they're very, very hard to fire unless you go nuclear on them. But this is interesting. At the beginning, there wasn't a whole lot of oversight being done. You weren't sending this to committee. It was being done in the full committee. So every single nomination was done on the floor of the whole committee of the Senate. So everyone was there. And this only changes after the Civil War, when they begin to say, okay, maybe we should send it to different committees. So, we're going to send the Secretary of Defense to the War Department and or to the Committee on Armed Services or something. They'll make the decision on this. And then only in the 20th century does it get in any way public. Before this, it's all kind of closed door kind of stuff, closed committee sessions, closed floor Senate. And now we're welcoming in hearings, public hearings, where they're being asked to come in and testify with cameras rolling. And it adds this whole new level of scrutiny. Though I'm not sure we've actually gotten better at vetting, it's just turned it into kind of political theater.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more public. It's interesting about handing it over to committees instead of the whole Senate doing it. I mean, some of that I imagine just has to be quantity.
Yeah.
We went from, I don't know what the number of PAS appointees were in the 19th century by the time we hit the Civil War, and PAS meaning President and Senate. I don't know what that number was, but I'm sure it's well short of the 1,200 or so we do this for now.
Right.
Any sense of what was going on politically whenever we started making it more public?
I think it was just the sheer number and the need for more in-depth vetting to be done by committees who specialize on that thing.
Okay. Because I do associate the sort of progressive era, the 1890s up to the 1920s with a sort of a heightening of not just increased controversy in American politics, which you did have, but a more public kind of controversy.
Right.
I mean, it is part and parcel. Maybe this is part of the explanation. I'm going to completely speculate here.
Okay.
I have no firm basis for this speculation, but I wonder, as this comes to be in the 20th century, some of this is we begin to distrust the party apparatus and the sort of institutions to handle this stuff for us.
Right.
And part of the case that the progressives make is actually that, no, the people should be involved sort of start to finish in government,
right.
Including recalling people from office, removing judges if they don't like the decisions they made, getting involved in how we pick candidates. We don't want candidates picked in the smoke-filled room. We kind of want all of it done out in public now so that we all get to vote on it and have our say. And maybe that just gets extended to office holders. Like, hey, wait a minute, the president's picking a new attorney general.
We should have a say.
Yeah, I want to know what's going on there.
Yeah.
It's not enough for me that my representatives in Congress have sort of done this in the committee room.
Right. Well, and that makes sense for hearings, but full committee starts in 1868.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Today, there are over 1,100 positions that require Senate approval.
Well, I will say 1868, though, I mean, this is a period when, after the Civil War, we enter a period of congressional government.
Right.
When Congress really trounced the presidency.
Yeah.
I mean, Congress decided we were actually in the driver's seat.
A necessary corrective.
We are the first branch of government.
Right.
And dominated a few presidents there. I mean,
Andrew Johnson,
but even Grant and some of his successors.
The no-name presidents who are no-name because Congress is in charge.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so over 1,100 positions today. That is a huge time commitment on the part of the Senate. And it will take them up to 2 years to do this, to get all these people confirmed. For example, there are over 500 positions that haven't even had someone nominated for yet in the new administration, which isn't a knock against this administration. It's just that's how it is in all the administrations. You've got to deal with the most important people first. So who's even included in this? You have, obviously, everyone knows the cabinet, right? The cabinet are the big ones they've got to get through first. But then you need every assistant secretary, every deputy secretary, every single ambassador needs to be confirmed, undersecretaries, boards, commissions, CFOs, positions you cannot even imagine exist under the executive branch need to be confirmed by the Senate. And this is what each of these looks like. you need to first get a background check through both the FBI and the Office of Government Ethics, which sounds like a whole thing. And then you fill out a questionnaire for the relevant committee. And by the way, these committees are very interesting. Over half of the nominees go to 3 committees in the Senate. So they've got a huge workload, just these 3 committees. And that's Foreign Relations, Commerce, and Homeland Security. So just those 3 committees together deal with half of all confirmations, which is amazing. Okay, and then they will fill out their questionnaire. Then you'll have committee hearings, which take up anywhere from 1 to 3 days. And then you get a vote from the committee, favorable, unfavorable, or no recommendation, which doesn't happen very often, back to the full committee. And then it's subject to the cloture process, though we'll explain what happened with that in just a second. And then it goes for a full vote on the floor of the Senate. In other words, the Senate is so busy doing justice. If they did just this, just confirmations, it would take up like a year of their time.
Do they deal with any of them as sort of slates of people?
They do for military promotions.
Okay.
But ambassadors, from what I understand, for example, individual, every single, which is, again, why these poor committees are so bogged down by this. We've got a lot of ambassadors, and many of those positions will stay open for longer than a year at a time because there's such a backlog. So, of course, the longest delay will be for the no names. The shortest delay will be for the cabinets, but even the cabinets have had an increase in time that they have to wait for committees to do this, which brings us to a very fair question, which is, are there too many positions that require Senate confirmation? You can see the argument for the cabinet. You can see the argument for ambassadors, I guess. Do all of the undersecretaries, all the deputy assistants, all of the board commissioners in fairly non-controversial areas, do they all really require Senate confirmation? Is there a way to whittle this down?
Oh, there certainly is. I mean, we could just we could put more confidence in the Republican executive and the whole idea of a unitary Republican executive.
Right.
The idea there is precisely because the executive power is in one set of hands, the president, and the president's elected. It means you have a responsible person who answers to the public and there's only one of them. They can't pass the buck, can't blame other people, who can then make responsible decisions. And you can sort of point the finger at them and go, you make stupid appointments or you put idiots in office who do foolish things. It's all on you. So make sure you do a good job of this. You could definitely employ that logic and say, you know what, except for the most sensitive positions, the most senior positions in the government, and in our system of diplomacy, we're just going to let the president be responsible for this on our behalf. And that would be a reasonable thing to do from one perspective. It does partake of a really interesting logic, which I think if we resurrected like an anti-federalist opponent of the Constitution, and if they were clever enough, they'd say, you know what, this is actually just a symptom of something we tried to warn you about. If you try to extend a government over too big of a territory, it can't really be representative anymore.
Right.
It's going to have to be something more like imperial power. I mean, this was the anti-federalists consistently said. The only way to effectively govern a large territory is not through a republic, it's through an empire. A concentration of executive power, the kind of efficiency you get with one person in charge who sort of presides over this massive structure and does it through the sort of mechanism of a standing army too. So big standing military plus a massive bureaucracy, all controlled by one person. That's an empire, right?
Yeah.
And and the anti-federalists would say it kind of helps, but not really, that you elect the person. So from one perspective, this is a perfectly reasonable way to deal with increasingly complex government in a very large society.
Right.
On the other hand, that looks more and more like empire and not republicanism.
Right, which this is an unusual question for me to ask because I feel like I'm constantly beating the drum of Congress take back power from the presidency. And yet in this one instance, you're like, well, Congress, you could really let go of the reins on some of these. But there are other solutions besides just decreasing the number of Senate confirmed appointments. Yeah. You could do that. For example, You could create a time limit in which the Senate must consider a nomination. There's currently no time limit. I think the longest open position under the Biden administration was an ambassador, which was over 400 days. So you could create a time limit. You have to do it here. But in order to have that time limit, you'd also have to fix the Senate schedule, which frankly needs to happen anyways. So fix the number of working days in Washington and fix the committee schedule. And you'll have to change some of the cloture rules.
And so this would work with like president makes a nomination, Senate's busy, doesn't get around to it, the 6-month clock runs out or whatever, and person's automatically confirmed.
No. Good question. Is that how that would work? I actually have no idea. I'm just spitballing here. This is just one solution. I don't know how that would work. You can't just do that because then it's a workaround for the president.
So say you actually might have a constitutional problem.
Right. So how do you get the Senate to be, to expedite the process? How do you get the Senate to be other than what it is, which is slow?
Well, I do think, it is slow. I think getting the Senate to recognize that the power to confirm is not a power to control. The fact that they get to confirm or reject appointees does not actually allow them to control those departments or those officers into the future. So I'm not sure that there's as much at stake in confirmation as we sometimes assume. I mean, you pointed out the quality control. The point is to keep a bad office holder out. So a confirmation power simply allows you to try to eliminate incompetent people or bad actors. It doesn't do anything to tell you you're getting a really good person, if that makes sense. So it's entirely negative in its effect, right? All of its benefits. So maybe if we recognize that and you sort of lower the stakes a little bit and just told Congress, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't spend this much time on it. Maybe you should take a pass at this, let a committee make a recommendation, and unless it looks like there's a serious problem with the person, just confirm and let's move on.
Right, but that puts us in the uncomfortable position of telling Congress to stop acting as partisans. This has become deeply polarized, this process. Is your chance in a hearing as a committee member from the opposing political party is your chance to go viral on Instagram, to say, oh, this is how this new president is dictatorial in this way or another. In some sense, it's not even about the nominee, although sometimes it is. It's often just about the state of American politics and kind of partisan backlash. First, do you want some proof on how long this process has gone?
Yes.
Okay. This is just for cabinet officials. So just for the guys who actually get confirmed rather quickly. And some of these hearings actually start before a president is even inaugurated.
And what's the number on this now? Cabinet offices?
15.
15.
Okay. So under the Bush II administration, so George W. Bush, Jr. Bush, it took 2 weeks for all of his cabinet nominees to be confirmed. That has increased to 3 months under the first Trump administration. On average, cabinet nominees from Reagan to Biden took 3 times as long to get confirmed by the Senate. So an average of 69.4 days to 192 days under Biden.
192?
192, yes. A couple of other interesting things. Between your hearings by a committee and actually getting a vote on the floor of the Senate, which is the important part. What the committee says doesn't ultimately matter. It doesn't give you your position. It's the floor vote. For Biden, it was 21 days between hearing and confirmation. And for Trump, in his first term, it was 27 days. So there's even this month-long gap between hearing and confirmation. How does that happen? Well, a good part of it is just that the Senate executive calendar is so full. They've got so many of these coming through. But it's also because of very costly cloture rules. So for people who don't know, cloture is the way you end debate in Congress, right? You take a cloture vote. Normally, this is held to a 60-vote threshold. This is what we mean when we talk about the filibuster. If you don't get to 60, then debate goes on endlessly and you never get a floor vote. In 2013, though, Democrats removed that threshold. So now it's just simple majority to end debate. But that's a whole vote you have to do. And it takes forever to get these very old people into the Senate chambers to have each one voice vote, yes or no, on cloture. And then you do a second full vote on whether or not to actually confirm the person. So these are costly in terms of time. It can take an hour or 2 or 3 to get everyone from whatever committee meetings they're in to do a floor vote. That's at least one of the reasons why this is so difficult. And it's easier now than it was in 2013.
I had no idea it was quite that lengthy for cabinet officers.
Isn't that amazing?
Although, I mean, there are exceptions to this, right? I mean, Congress, the Senate expedites certain cabinet positions,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So there is a little bit of triaging here.
Yeah,
There's
the big ones.
There is the sort of like, how badly do we need a transportation secretary?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, will the train stop running on time if there's no transportation secretary for the next?
Right.
It's like under Biden, like, where's Mayor Pete? The place is going to shut down. So there is a little bit, I mean, Congress does a little bit of self-policing on this. I would actually be quite curious if the Senate has, I guess, sort of dared to hold out on a really essential position. And here we're talking about defense, justice, the attorney general, and actually not cabinet positions here. It seems like this list really involves especially national security and law enforcement.
Well, let's look at what's already been confirmed. We're recording this February 3rd,
it is
2025.
February 3rd.
So for this new administration, you're totally right. The big ones have been filled. You've got Hegseth over at Defense. You've got Rubio at State. You've done the Attorney General. Randomly, Doug Burgum in Interior has gotten through because I guess that's important. You don't have yet a Director of National Intelligence, which is a big intelligence kind of role, but that's very controversial. But yeah, you do kind of triage the big ones first. Treasury is through. That's done.
In all fairness, there is part of the intelligence community that thinks the DNI is kind of
So maybe you could wait on that one. It's like Transportation Secretary. We don't need you right now.
Yeah, well, they don't actually do any intelligence work. They're just supposed to sort of collate everything that's going on.
That's funny.
I sometimes wonder, what does the DNI really do? I mean, they just actually sit in an office and sort of receive reports from all these.
Yeah, well, my answer is I have no idea. I have no idea what this person
Nor do I.
does day to day. But I don't know. They have a fancy name.
And this is Trump's proposed that Tulsi Gabbard.
This is Tulsi Gabbard's
fill
position.
this role.
Right. Some of the more controversial ones are actually for kind of smaller positions, right? Health and Human Services. Which brings us to the question of partisanship. How partisan does this process get? And is that actually new in any sense that this process gets partisan?
Well, also a question, is it like a problem that it's partisan? I mean, surely it is. Though there are these interesting dynamics. I mean, if it was pure partisanship in the sense of like, we just want to ruin the chances of the president. I mean, assuming you're in Congress, president's in the other party, pure partisanship would say you just want to do whatever you can to tank the other guy's chances, right? Make him look as bad as possible.
Right.
It doesn't seem like that's the whole story with what goes on. In part because people do come through or widely respected. I mean, Rubio was confirmed as Secretary of State 99-0 by the Senate. He breezed through. Part of that was because he was a senator. So this is an interesting thing. When someone is appointed who's a member of Congress, there's actually this weird set of norms that kick in. Yeah. Where you kind of have to be more nice to them.
Right.
You kind of have to expedite things. You're not allowed to look too closely at the, sort of embarrassing details. Rubio really benefited from this, not only because he had been in the Senate, but also because he was just well liked.
Right.
And so it does seem to me like there is a way to transcend partisanship.
Right. No, that's very true. Though each president of the 21st century has had at least one nominee, not rejected by the Senate, but withdrawn by the president because they were going to fail.
Right.
So it has literally always been partisan. Here's some examples. Jackson will have Taney will be his nominee for Treasury Secretary. He'll be rejected on grounds that policies that he had supported previously that the Congress didn't like.
And this was his conference. this was trying to get the Senate to confirm him after he had been appointed as a recess
exactly.
appointee.
Right.
Okay.
Which does kind of rankle them a little bit.
Yeah, because Jackson had fired the Treasury Secretary and then put Taney in his place.
Yes.
And then the Senate said, no, we don't think that's how this is going to work.
Yeah. So it's more about a power play. Then you get Tyler, who has all of his nominees for Treasury, Navy, and War rejected in 1841. And I think maybe they just didn't like the guy. They were upset with the power of the executive at the time. It's not until you get Coolidge in 1925 that we have the first nominee for a cabinet secretary of the same party as the majority party in the Senate be rejected.
Really?
Yes, 1925.
That surprises
Which
me.
again shows you partisanship was always part of it. It's always been there. Something to be said for it. It's a same party. That's the first time it's rejected.
Okay. So I mean, you usually you're hand wringing over Congress giving up its sort of institutional pride and identity.
Hand wringing makes it sound like I'm not right, but
I'm not saying you're not right. I mean, you should. I do a lot of hand wringing over many important things. Is this working in the other direction? That is, Congress used to just defer to the executive branch about this sort of thing and didn't really ask too many questions. And is this one area where Congress has said, you know what, we're not going to take your word for it. We're going to really do our job here.
Yeah, I think it is one of those rare examples. And I don't think it's necessarily motivated by that so much as the political theater hearings offer. Okay. I think it's about the personal political ambitions. I mean, this is just my theory. I think it plays into a senator's personal political ambitions in a way that pre-hearing nominations did not.
Do public hearings add anything important?
No, I don't think anything useful is ever learned in a public hearing. It's truly just show, I think, at this point, because most of them are so trained to give a non-answer to something. So you're going to learn more in the questionnaires that they'll submit than you will in an actual public hearing. I think it's more about the person asking the question. If you notice anything that goes up on Instagram or YouTube, it's not the face of the person coming to testify. It's the face of the senator asking the question.
Oh, that's funny.
That's on the camera.
No, I hadn't thought about that, but it is true. Yeah, every time there's some viral thing about Hegseth's nomination fight or confirmation fight, it's, someone else's face, not his.
Right. So,
I mean, there are exceptions here. I think occasionally the nominee manages to say sufficiently explosive things that they get the headline. But
that's true.
Rubio waxed eloquent. I think Kennedy's confirmation hearing, RFK's confirmation hearing, produced a number of thrilling sound bites.
Right. He did kind of steal some of the limelight away from the senators, which is very rude. So this brings us back to the idea of checks and balances, which is this might be one of the few checks that the Senate is actually more actively pursuing than they did before, and for reasons of maybe just pure ambition, which takes us right back to the Federalist. We'll counter ambition with ambition in some sense. But we shouldn't expect to see hearings get any less controversial in the future, though hopefully they will become more expedited.
But that's a bit of a problem because that means that Congress is getting most passionate, the Senate's getting most passionate about a thing that involves it in the executive branch. That is, this is, confirmations are not legislative functions.
Nope.
In this case, the Senate is just being used as a backstop, as a pure check, right? This is not normally your job. Deciding who's the Secretary of State is not really a legislative function, but we're just employing you as a kind of, referee to make sure that a babysitter, to make sure that the executive branch doesn't get out of line. If that's the case, then it's a little bit of a problem that Congress gets super excited about that while it's busy neglecting lawmaking.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to find silver linings here in the health of checks and balances today. So that's a potential silver lining is they're getting interested in active in something, even if it's not their actual primary constitutional function. But it will continue to be partisan. I do think there is a movement, though, to expedite the process or to reduce the number of political appointees.
Well, that wouldn't be a bad idea. And just taking the TV cameras out would be a bad idea.
Or just taking the TV cameras out, and watch what that does for the calendar. I wonder if you just take the cameras out, how quickly things would speed up. Well, we'll have to look back at these numbers again once the confirmations for the cabinet are actually done here in a month or two. But for now, I think we've figured out executive confirmations.
That's right.